I never thought much about old houses. At least, not until I found myself living in one. It started with a phone call I wasn't expecting. My friend Tyler, he's the kind of guy who always had something crazy happening in his life, was the one to tell me, "Hey, I found this place. Cheap. Too cheap. But it's a steal." He sounded way too excited, but I figured he was just looking for someone to share in his excitement about a new adventure. I wasn't in the best spot mentally, a little down after some stuff had gone south, so I agreed to check it out. When I pulled up to the house, it didn't look like much. An old Victorian style, the kind of place you'd expect to see in those ghost movies where the walls moan and the floorboards creak. The yard was overgrown, with trees casting long shadows across the porch. But the price? It was a fraction of what anything in the area would go for. Too good to pass up, right? Tyler was already there, pacing around the front porch with his hands stuffed in his pockets. "It's perfect," he said, like he was trying to convince himself. "I mean, yeah, it's a bit worn, but that's why it's cheap." I didn't know it then, but that's when the air changed. Not in an obvious way, but there was something off. A stillness. The kind you only feel when you're being watched. I walked in after him, and the first thing that hit me wasn't the dust or the smell. It was the temperature. It was cold. And I'm not talking about the old house, no insulation kind of cold. I mean a kind of chill that nipped at your skin, like it was coming from somewhere deeper than just the air. Tyler didn't seem to notice. He was too busy opening every door, every closet, as if the house had some secret waiting for him behind one of them. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I turned a corner, I felt eyes on me. Eyes that weren't mine. "Hey, check this out," Tyler called out from the back of the house. He sounded excited, but there was something in his voice I couldn't place. I walked toward him, finding him standing in front of a narrow staircase that led down into what appeared to be a basement. The steps were cracked, old with splintering beneath his feet as he descended. "Are you sure?" I asked. "It doesn't feel right down there." Tyler just smiled. "I've got a good feeling. Come on, it'll be fine." But as he led the way down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in the house anymore. Something had woken up. The basement was exactly what you'd expect from an old house like this. Dark, musty, and with that unmistakable scent of mildew in the air. Tyler was already shining his flashlight around, scanning the space like it was some kind of treasure trove. "Look at this," he said, and I followed the beam of light. The walls were lined with old, wooden shelves that seemed to bow under the weight of decades-old dust. But there was something else. In the far corner of the room, covered in a thick sheet, was a large old chest. I wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but my gut told me something was off. The chest didn't belong there. Everything in the room looked like it had been untouched for years. But the chest, it looked new. Too new. "Don't open it, Tyler," I warned, my voice barely above a whisper. My stomach dropped as a cold shiver ran down my spine. I could feel the air thickening around me, like something was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. But Tyler, of course, didn't listen. He tossed the sheet aside and crouched down beside the chest, fiddling with the rusted lock. "Come on, don't be such a buzzkill," he said, as if he were unlocking the door to some forgotten treasure. I wanted to tell him to stop, but my feet were glued to the ground. A sick curiosity overtook me, pulling me forward against my better judgment. I stepped closer, watching as the lock clicked open with an eerie sound that echoed in the basement like a scream held back for years. Tyler lifted the lid slowly, and I swear, for a split second, the temperature dropped even more. My breath misted in the air, and I could feel the weight of something heavy, something ancient, pressing down on me. Inside the chest was a pile of old clothes, but as Tyler reached in, I saw something that made my heart stop. Beneath the clothes there was a figure curled up, as if it had been lying there for a long time. I froze, unable to speak. Tyler didn't notice at first. He pulled the clothes away, revealing the shape. Skin like leather, twisted, gaunt limbs, and a face that wasn't quite human. It was like a mannequin had been left to rot in that chest for years. Tyler, now oblivious to the change in atmosphere, was laughing. Dude, this is some creepy stuff. I bet it's just some kind of weird prop. But I couldn't breathe, couldn't look away. The thing in the chest, it wasn't dead. At least not completely. Its eyes snapped open. And that's when everything went dark. I don't know how long I was out. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. But when I came to, I was back upstairs, sprawled on the hardwood floor of the living room. My head throbbed like a bad hangover, and I was gasping for air as if I'd just run a marathon. Tyler was nowhere in sight. I scrambled to my feet, disoriented, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind was a mess, trying to piece together what had just happened. That thing in the basement. Had it been real? Was I dreaming? The faint smell of rotting wood and something darker still lingered in the air. Tyler, I called out. My voice cracked as I moved through the house, my feet stumbling over the uneven floors. The shadows seemed thicker in every room, more oppressive, like they were following me, closing in. I made my way to the stairs, praying I wouldn't hear that heavy, unnatural silence again. But when I reached the top, I stopped. A noise, faint but unmistakable. It was coming from the basement. Tyler, I called out again, this time with more urgency. There was no answer, just the sound of shuffling, like something dragging itself across the floor. I shouldn't have gone back down there. I knew that, but something was pulling me, like an invisible hand wrapped around my chest, squeezing until I couldn't breathe. I had to know what happened to Tyler. The basement door creaked as I opened it, and a cold gust of air hit me like a punch to the gut. The smell of rot grew stronger as I descended the stairs, and when my flashlight flickered on, I saw something that made my stomach churn. The chest was open, but it was empty. Tyler wasn't there, but the figure, the thing that had been inside the chest, was gone too. I took a step further into the basement, my flashlight beam dancing across the walls. That's when I heard it, the low, guttural growl. I spun around. The room was empty. Then came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and behind me. I turned, my heart in my throat. There, standing at the top of the stairs, was Tyler. But not Tyler. His face was pale, his eyes wide, but they weren't his eyes anymore. His mouth hung open in a twisted grin that didn't belong on a human being. "Help me," he rasped, his voice barely recognizable. It wasn't Tyler. It was something that looked like him, something pretending. And that's when the lights flickered out completely. The darkness swallowed me whole. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my own breathing, shallow and frantic, as I backed away from the stairs. But then, that twisted version of Tyler started moving toward me. I could hear his feet scraping against the floor, slow, deliberate, dragging like he was having trouble lifting them. "Tyler?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady, but it came out more like a plea. "This isn't you, man. You've got to fight it." He didn't answer. His head tilted to one side, and his grin only stretched wider, showing teeth too sharp, too uneven. The kind of grin that didn't belong to any living thing. I couldn't take it anymore. My hands shook as I fumbled for the flashlight in my pocket, praying it would come on, praying for some kind of light to break through the suffocating darkness. When it flickered to life, I was almost relieved, until I saw his eyes. His pupils were gone, just dark, empty voids, as if something had eaten them. I could feel my pulse quicken, my breath hitching in my chest. I wasn't just scared, I was horrified. I was paralyzed with fear. "Stay back," I warned, my voice barely audible. "Stay the hell back, Tyler." But he didn't listen. Instead, he made a sickening sound. A low growl that almost sounded like a human moan, but wrong. I bolted. I ran, not caring where I went, just needing to get away from whatever had taken him. But the house, it seemed alive now, shifting, the walls narrowing and the air thickening. It was like the whole place was closing in on me, trapping me inside. Every creak of the floorboards felt like it was amplifying, echoing in my skull. I reached the front door, only to find it locked. I pulled on the handle, panic bubbling up my throat. I turned back, and there he was, standing at the bottom of the stairs. His body was wrong, so wrong, like something had twisted him out of shape. His limbs were too long, too thin. His skin had started to crack, like dried leather, and his neck twisted at an unnatural angle. The eyes, those empty eyes, were still on me. "You can't leave," he rasped, the voice garbled, broken. I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time for anything. My body moved on its own, desperate to escape. I threw myself at the door, slamming my shoulder against it, praying that it would give. And it did. The old wood creaked, and with one final push, it burst open, throwing me into the yard. I didn't stop running until my legs gave out. I collapsed on the grass, gasping for air, my heart threatening to beat out of my chest. But when I looked up, through the dim light of the moon, I saw him, Tyler, or whatever was left of him, standing in the doorway of the house, his twisted, broken figure watching me. The house, the thing inside it, it wasn't done with me yet. I didn't know how long I lay there on the grass, my body trembling uncontrollably, but I knew one thing for sure. There was no escaping that house. It was like it had marked me, like it had already decided I was part of its story now. I forced myself to stand, still shaking, my legs barely holding me up. The cold night air bit at my skin, but it wasn't the cold that scared me. It was the feeling that something, or someone, was lurking just beyond my sight, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I took a few hesitant steps back, toward my car, which was parked just at the edge of the overgrown yard. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I kept my eyes fixed on the house, on the doorway where Tyler's twisted figure still stood. I had to get away. I had to leave. But the moment I reached the car, a horrible realization struck me like a punch to the gut. The engine wouldn't start. I turned the key over and over, but all I got was the sound of the starter trying and failing to turn the engine over. That's when I heard it. The low hum. The sound of the house calling to me. At first, it was a distant hum, but then it grew louder. It was as if the walls themselves were speaking, or maybe something deeper, something hidden inside the ground, beneath the house. A voice, a presence, pulling me in. I looked back at the house, my heart in my throat. The door was wide open now, and something was moving inside. Not Tyler. Not anymore. It was something else. It was hard to describe, but the air around me felt thick with it. My mind couldn't grasp what was happening, but I could feel it closing in on me. Whatever it was, the shadows around the house seemed to grow, stretching out like tendrils, reaching toward me. The growling returned. A sound low and guttural, this time mixed with something else. A faint whispering, like voices, ancient and hungry. I wasn't just hearing it in my ears anymore. It was in my mind. I couldn't stay there. I backed away from the car, my heart pounding in my chest as I looked for an escape route. The woods that surrounded the house loomed in front of me, dark and foreboding. I couldn't hear the wind anymore, and the air had taken on a strange, metallic taste. With no other choice, I ran into the woods, my feet slipping on the wet ground as I sprinted through the underbrush. I didn't dare look back. Every time I did, I could feel it. A presence behind me, getting closer, but I refused to turn around and face it. The deeper I ran into the woods, the darker it got. The trees closed in, their gnarled branches stretching overhead like claws ready to reach down and grab me. But I couldn't stop, couldn't give in. I pushed forward until I couldn't run anymore. My legs were burning, my lungs screaming for air, and I stumbled to a stop, leaning against a tree to catch my breath. That's when I heard the softest sound. Footsteps, not in front of me but behind me, light, unhurried, like something walking through the brush, stalking. I turned slowly, and there, standing between the trees, was Tyler, or at least what was left of him. His body was now almost entirely decomposed, skin hanging in tatters, eyes still hollow, his grin wide and horrific, and in his hands he held something. It was a knife. I froze. There, in the darkness, Tyler, or whatever was left of him, stood with that knife, his hand shaking as it pointed toward me. His grin stretched even wider, more grotesque now, as if the very act of smiling was an impossible strain for whatever had taken over him. His eyes, those empty sockets, locked onto mine, and I could feel that same suffocating pressure in the air, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Everything inside me screamed to run, but my body wouldn't respond. The thing that had been Tyler took a step toward me, the sound of its footsteps wet and heavy, like it was dragging itself through the mud. It didn't speak. No more twisted words. No more growls. It didn't need to. The knife gleamed in the pale light of the moon, a sharp, cruel blade that looked too new for something so old. I managed to take a step back, then another. My legs were on fire, my breath ragged as I tried to put distance between us. But it was like the forest had closed in, like the trees themselves were pulling me toward him. Every direction felt wrong. Every sound in the woods now felt like a threat, like something was watching, waiting for me to make my move. Tyler, or whatever it was, took another step forward, and I stumbled, my feet tangled in the underbrush. I hit the ground hard, the knife gleaming above me as I looked up at the hollowed-out remains of my friend. And that's when I saw it. In the corner of my vision, something moved between the trees. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, but then it moved again, more distinct this time. A shape, no, a shadow. It was bigger than anything I'd seen before, and it was coming closer. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel its presence. Cold, suffocating, like it was coming for me, or for him. For the first time since I'd stepped into that godforsaken house, I understood. The house wasn't just alive. It was a hunger, a thing that devoured not just the bodies of those who entered it, but their souls, their very essence. Tyler had been consumed by it, twisted into something that was no longer human. And now it was my turn. But before I could fully process it, the shadow was upon us. Tyler screamed. No, it wasn't him. It was the thing that wore his face, his body. It screamed as a heavy, dark mass wrapped around him, pulling him backward into the trees, dragging him out of sight, its whispers merging with the cries of something ancient and hungry. I scrambled to my feet, still in shock, still gasping for air as the world around me seemed to bend, like reality itself was unraveling. And for one fleeting moment, I could hear the house. It was calling to me, drawing me back, urging me to come home. But I couldn't. I ran. I didn't look back. Not once. I didn't stop until I found the road, until I saw the lights of another car in the distance. I made it out, but I know that the house is still there. I know that the thing in the basement, whatever it is still waiting, still hungry, and one day someone else will find it, and they won't leave either. Did you like these stories? Write in the comments. And please write what you didn't like. It will be useful for me to know your opinion. And I will improve my work. Thank you. Subscribe to my channel and click the bell so as not to miss new stories. I try for you.